Welcome to the Scarlet Faithful Podcast, episode 191. Aaron Brightman coming to you on, October 17th. It's a Tuesday. It's been a whirlwind with my professional life, but also just Rutgers football and also ramping up for Rutgers basketball, fall sports. There's a lot going on. And we're kind of just throwing this one together, but I wanted to kind of talk about how Rutgers can finish the season strong. Obviously, they need to win at Indiana on Saturday, but I think that starts, we've talked about culture, we've talked about the toughness of this team. I think now in these next 5 games is where the depth is going to show or potentially not show. That's where it needs to appear. This is the 8th game in a row for Rutgers. In 8 straight weeks, a lot of Big Ten teams have had their bye already. This would be the 3rd straight week. Wisconsin was coming off a bye. Michigan State was coming off a bye. Indiana did play last week. They got blown out by Michigan, but they were on the bye the week before. They are in the midst of some type of quarterback decision. Tom Allen being elusive, just saying that whichever quarterback starts on Saturday for Indiana will be their starter the rest of the way. But Rutgers, this is their 8th game in a row. And the offensive line I wrote about today on Tuesday is tightening, which is a good thing. And I really think one of the things that got not lost, but just wasn't a headliner in the comeback win on Saturday was the play of the offensive line down the stretch. Gavin Wimsatt made plays. Kyle Monungai ran like crazy. But the offensive line, I went back and I did a highlight reel on my YouTube channel for the top 15 plays of the fourth quarter comeback. And the last 4 are the 4 first downs that Monungai ran for against Michigan State. And, at least 2 of them, the offensive line, you talk about like gang tackling. That was gang blocking. The offensive line just destroyed Michigan State. Monungai went, I think it was the 3rd first down. He went like another 6 to 7 to 8 yards, like basically in a swarm of offensive linemen just barreling through the Michigan State defensive line. So first time all year that Rutgers had played all 5 offensive linemen 60 plus snaps in a game. It was also the first time that combination had started. You have Holland Pierce, obviously the anchor at left tackle. Brian Felter got the start at left guard. Gus Zelinkus still at center. You had right guard Curtis Dunlap switched before the Wisconsin game. And the feel-good story of the season, Reggie Sutton starting at right tackle. And that offensive line got better as the game went on. The continuity there. So that depth, like Felter and Sutton weren't even reported about in preseason in terms of being in the mix. And here they are starting. You have to imagine that offensive line combination is going to start against Indiana. I think there's some real promise there. Sutton is still working his way back. He doesn't have the same mobility, but as David Anderson mentioned on the podcast yesterday, that touch block he got at the last second to allow Wimsatt to make that throw to Isaiah Washington, that kind of started the whole drive. I think it was the Isaiah Washington touchdown pass. I can't remember which one David pointed out, but that was just like a finesse thing that just was like such a detail. This offensive line has a chance to really come together, and that depth. Now Shiano talks about the younger players behind them, but if these 5 can emerge and be consistent now, it's a real positive. Of course, defensive line. The rotation has tightened lately. I don't know if you've noticed the last few games they're playing less. Can that defensive line hold up? We remember 2 years ago at Northwestern, it was Game 7. It was the 7th game in a row. Obviously, Rutgers did not have nearly the same amount of momentum or playing for the same amount of stakes that they will be on Saturday against Indiana when they go needing one more win to become bowl eligible. But that Northwestern game 2 years ago was hugely disappointing because essentially physically they didn't show up, and they got outplayed by a bad Northwestern team. And that's been concerning to me about this Indiana game the whole time, because it is similarly 8th game in a row How beat up is this team? The injury report, they had 8 guys not available. 2 are due to NCAA eligibility issues with Nassim Brantley and Bo Masco. 6 were out. No, other than Chris Long, who's been out significantly, and now Tyler Needham also. They've been out multiple weeks. Both were starters at wide receiver and right tackle, respectively. The other guys have played kind of, seldomly. So overall, in terms of actual injury status, you're doing really well at this point in the season. Knock on wood. I'm sure guys are banged up and playing with some stuff. So obviously, emotionally, they're going to go into this game with a lot to play for, and that's going to help. But as they get through this game and then through the bye week, November is a brutal, brutal schedule. You have Ohio State at home, then you're at Iowa, and then you're at Penn State. Those teams are combined 18-1, and then you have Maryland on Senior Day, Thanksgiving weekend at 5-2. So that's going to be a crucial matchup as well. And I think that game is very much in the balance based on the health of each roster going into that game. How is either team going to be going into those games? In terms of, 2 years ago, we saw Maryland was depleted. Rutgers won the game. Last year, I think Rutgers was pretty beat up and they got blown out. So that's going to have a big part of it. But, can they compete? Can they be competitive against Ohio State in 2 weeks at home? This game is going to get a lot of national press if they can win at Indiana. Be 6-2 and 3-2 in the Big Ten, hosting Ohio State first weekend of November. That's going to get a lot of attention. Then you go to Iowa, right? That's kind of the dream, I think, scenario for Rutgers fans is to beat Indiana and then go to Iowa and get that signature win. Iowa right now 6-1. They're going to be favored the rest of the way. The worst offense in college football, 133 out of 133. Obviously, their defense is elite. Can Rutgers compete in that game? Depth is going to be a big part of that. Year after year after they play Ohio State, I always feel like they're extra beat up after that game because physically Ohio State has just overmatched Rutgers in every way year after year. Maybe this is the year that, Rutgers has looked physically equal to Michigan and Wisconsin. They didn't execute at the same level. They don't have the same talent, but physically they looked the part. How will they match up against Ohio State is really, I think, a key to how the rest of November plays out. Iowa is a massive game. Then you go to Penn State, who has dominated Rutgers in the trenches in recent years. And that's going to be a big test as well. And again, it goes back to depth. So huge tests coming up. We know what the culture is of this team. We know the toughness of this team. We know that, talent-wise, development-wise, they're getting better. Can the depth hold up as we go down the stretch of this season? And that's a huge question mark, and that will ultimately, I think, determine what the ceiling is for this team. Then you have Maryland, like I spoke about, and then hopefully, fingers crossed, there they are. You get enough wins to go to a bowl, and then you have what is a hugely important 15 practice cycle that is essentially another spring camp, but right after the season to get ready for the bowl game, which would be huge for the development of this program in the long term. So there's a lot riding on go. It's not just going to a bowl. It's not just having an extra game, changing perception, helping perception. It's getting that developmental time for your younger players. It's just huge. It's unquantifiable. You can't. It's priceless. And so there's a lot riding on it. And it all, as of right now, it comes down to Indiana. I do think, honestly, if you lose Indiana, you do suffer a big momentum hit from what you gained against Michigan State last week. So you also, as I mentioned yesterday, you go into the bye week. You're 6-2. You're 3-2. You got a 2-week high news cycle, and then you're going to host, number 3 or 4 Ohio State, who's undefeated. It would be a great perception changing moment for the program, and I really hope they can capitalize. They won at Indiana 38-3 2 years ago. They started down 14-0 last year. I don't know if you remember that, and they came back and scored 24 unanswered to beat Indiana at home last year. They're 4-5 all time in the Big Ten against Indiana. Best record against any opponent. This could even it up and go 5-5. So Obviously, massive game. We're going to have plenty of preview stuff throughout the week. But that was really my overarching point here is that, in terms of the rest of this season and how the ceiling will ultimately determine its depth. Wide receivers, I have to say, between Christian Dremmel's been a pleasant surprise, but credit to Isaiah Washington for making some big catches, including that touchdown catch against Michigan State. He's had some moments this year. Jaquay Jackson, Ian Strong, all four guys have proven capable in different spots. So the depth of wide receiver, honestly, is better than I expected to because Brantley and Long haven't even really played. So that's a huge plus. Shout out to Dave Brock, the wide receiver coach. That hasn't gotten enough attention. A couple stats real quick. Wanted to throw out there in terms of progress that you can note. In terms of Rutgers right now, they are 14th in the country, fewest penalties at 4.29 per game. That is massive. 15th in the red zone at 0.70, 70% conversion rate. That's massive. 16th in fourth down conversion. 26th in turnover margin. Scoring defense, passing defense. I don't count kickoff returns. They're number one in the nation, but I think they've had 2 kickoff returns. Rashad Rochelle did have the 88-yarder, but I don't know. I guess they qualify, but that's not a lot of attempts. But 5th in passing defense, 8th in total defense, 8th in fumbles recovered, 12th in fewest sacks allowed. Shout out to that offensive line. 12th in scoring defense. But the penalties, 14th in penalties, 26th in turnover margin. That is all about limiting mistakes and capitalizing on your opponent's mistakes. That is just massive. They're also in every defensive category as a team. They're in the top half of the Big Ten. They're 7th or better. In conference play, Rutgers has now played 4 Big Ten games. They played 5 Power 5 opponents in 7 games. So these are not inflated stats. Yes, they played Wagner, but the conference-only stats, they're in the top half of every Big Ten ranking. Offense, they're typically 9th to 11th. Not great, not terrible. A little bit better than last year. Work in progress. But there's a lot of reasons for hope on this team. And again, going back, can that depth hold up? That will be another sign of progression for this program. And we'll have plenty more to talk about the rest of the week. Thanks for listening and watching. Check out all my coverage at thescarletfaithful.com, my YouTube channel, and wherever obviously you're listening to this on Apple, Spotify, or whatever. If you're watching my YouTube, thank you so much for listening once again to the Scarlet Faithful podcast.